everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. Wonderful to have you in the room with us. This is the last public meeting of the Local Public Sector Alliance Sub-Saharan Working Group, Sub-Saharan Africa Working Group. And we are joined by a number of people who will be presenting later this afternoon. My name is Jaap de Visser. I'm the National Research Chair in Multi-Level Government here in South Africa, and also one of the three co-chairs of the LPSA Working Group on Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm joined by my co-chair, Judy Oduma, who will do a brief word of introduction in a minute. And the third co-chair is Kawala, who may join us also later in the afternoon. And this afternoon's program is dedicated to intergovernmental supervision of decentralized entities of local governments. So we have a very interesting panel of speakers lined up. And I think this may be the first LPSA Sub-Saharan Africa Working Group meeting where we are fully bilingual. So we're going to have translation available, which you can switch on and off on your Zoom interface. So before we proceed, let me quickly ask Jackie to take us through how we switch on our translation services so that everyone is on board. Jackie, if you can quickly introduce that.
Thank you, Jaap. I will give a quick run through on how to connect your interpretation. At the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a globe icon with the word interpretation beneath it. So please click on this interpretation icon and select the channel that you would like to listen in. We have two options, English and French. And then if your laptop does not have the globe icon at the bottom, please check for it under the icon with more, with the three buttons. It should be available there. If you're joining and listening in through your mobile phone, you have two steps on your mobile phone. Again, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a more icon with three buttons. Just click on that and you will select the interpretation. You will find the interpretation icon with the globe icon. Click on that and select the language you would like to follow the session in. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. So you were just listening to Jacqueline Mutura, who is the coordinator of the working group, and she has been preparing and making sure that everything is lined up for this meeting. So if you experience any difficulties with the translation, it's best to reach out either to Jackie or to Raul, the interpreter, who you will also see in the list of participants, or Lynn, who's also there listed. I'm sure any of the three of them would be able to assist you, but I'm hoping that the translation works. So the program for this afternoon is to look at intergovernmental supervision of decentralized entities, basically looking at it from two perspectives, namely what happens in countries that are English-speaking, predominantly English-speaking, that have sort of a history and a tradition inherited or taken over or adapted from the British system. What kind of intergovernmental supervision of decentralized entities exists in some of those countries? And we then also want to look at the French-speaking countries on the continent, and here's some examples, some illustrations and practices from Francophone Africa, and see if we can make some useful comparisons, basically around two questions. Namely, one, does the national government monitor and evaluate local governments? And how does that work? And what are some of the instruments used and practices? And secondly, if things go wrong, if things go haywire, if there's no if there's bad governance, or if there's corruption, or if there is no delivery of services, is there also mechanisms in the system to essentially intervene in local governments by, for example, removing the political leadership or taking over the local government? We'd like to hear from our two panelists on those two issues from their two respective jurisdictions. And I think we're going to start with Gildas Sacramento. He is a public finance specialist who works in Benin and who will present to us a perspective from Benin on how in Francophone countries the issue of intergovernmental supervision of local governments is dealt with. So that is the first panelist on the program. But before we do that, first want to hand over to my co-chair, Ms. Judy Oduma, to just also welcome us and give a brief word of introduction. Judy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yap. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Thank you and welcome, colleagues across the continent. Thank you for joining us for this meeting. I just wanted to give maybe one or two remarks around our discussion topic today, speaking about intergovernmental supervision. And here we're talking about mechanisms shaping decentralization efforts across Africa. We actually identified this as a very critical topic, taking recognition of the fact that a lot of discussions always actually are around intergovernmental relations, fiscal transfers, other than intergovernmental relations supervision. And so in one of our discussions, if you've been attending our webinars, there was a thought to begin weighing in on intergovernmental supervision as a topic relevant for all of us across Africa. And if we really have to begin speaking about elevating the debate on decentralization across Africa. And so from these previous webinars, we have had discussions on various topics, intergovernmental relations, fiscal transfers being one of them. But today, with Tinashe and with Sacramento, I hope I pronounced it right, we would like to hear on issues around supervision, implementation of intergovernmental supervision varied across different countries. How do we see different regimes implementing this? How does this affect local and regional governments, for example? Are there any practical barriers to decentralization and autonomy of subnational governments? Are they necessary tools for stability and accountability? How do we speak? How do we strengthen supervision? And are there any reforms that we can actually share? And what are these reforms? What are these best practices that we can use to actually improve the balance between local autonomy and oversight, or what we call supervision in this particular case? And so with that very brief discussion, elaboration, I would like to hand it over to our colleagues who are discussing this today. I know we have Tinashe. Thank you very much for agreeing to give us good highlights on this, but also Gildas Sacramento, who will also touch on some best practices and how it has actually worked in his country. So that's the reason we have this meeting today. Then we'll actually just open up later on. Yap will open up for discussions and for questions. It's a new topic, but very exciting topic. Just moving a step forward into looking at how intergovernmental relations works, looking at how intergovernmental fiscal transfers have been actually implemented, and now speaking to supervision. Over to you, Yap.
Thank you so much, Judy, and thanks for emphasizing, the link between intergovernmental transfers and intergovernmental supervision. And yeah, we look forward to the input by the two panelists, Gildas Sacramento and Tinash Chiguata. I'll introduce Tinash when it's his time to speak. But let's first listen to Gildas. Over to you, Gildas, and we look forward to your input.
Let me share my screen. Okay. Merci à Jap et à toute l'équipe
Thank you, Yap,
qui
and
co-préside cette initiative.
the co-chair team and the whole supervising team. Thank you for this opportunity to share that process that is being implemented in Africa. And I'm going to share the case of Benin. My presentation would go through several points, and I would attempt to the best of my abilities to answer the questions that were asked by Yap earlier. How national governments assess the local governments, and is there some interaction or interference from the central government in the local government? So we are going to try and answer those questions, but before that, I'm going to give some information about Benin, which is a Western African country with 13.3 million people, according to the 2022 census. The surface area is 114,763 kilometers square. Our neighbors are Niger, Burkina in the north, Togo in the west, Nigeria, the giant Nigeria in the east, and in the south we have the Atlantic Ocean. Benin has been independent since August 1st, 1960, and it's a decentralized unitary state. I'm going to talk about that further later, and you are going to see how monitoring and evaluation by the national government works in that context. And as a decentralized unitary state, we have 12 départements or divisions that we call administrative circumscriptions, and they are deconcentrated. They are not autonomous. We have 77 communes or municipalities. Those are territorial collectivities, and they have budget autonomy. They have a legal they are legal entities. They have budget autonomy, and decentralization has been effective since 2003, and the objectives were grassroots democracy and local development. So decentralization and local governance in Benin.
Gildas, I'm very sorry, I have to interject because your slides are not moving.
Yes, I don't move my slide.
We're still on slide 1.
So
yes, I have not moved my slides. So
oh, you have not. Okay, all right, go for it then. Apologies.
La décentralisation est prévue par la Constitution. Les premières élections sont intervenues en 2002.
Decentralization is in the Constitution. The first municipal elections were in 2002, and we recently had a reform on decentralization in Benin, and I'm going to talk about that later. So regarding monitoring, evaluation, and reporting of municipal performance, I've moved my slides. I don't know if you can see that.
No, we're still on the opening slide.
Ah. Oh la la.
So maybe, yeah, now we moved. Yeah, thank you. Now we can see your next slide. This is...
Okay. So je vais commencer par présenter un peu les données générales. Donc le Bénin que j'ai essayé de citer.
So first, I tried to give a background of Benin in West Africa, and I'm going to talk about monitoring, evaluation, and reporting of municipal performance. I'm going to do that in this slide, and as you can see, we have the central government, which is constituted by ministries, and under it, we have divisions or départements. Those divisions are 12, and they are led by prefects appointed by the government. So that is this deconcentration. It is just an extension of the central government that we have at that level, at the division level. And underneath, we have municipalities, 77 municipalities that are led by mayors, and those mayors are elected. So it is decentralized. It's a decentralized authority. And in Benin, we have only one level of decentralization, which are municipalities. So when it comes to sharing information, instructions, at the division level, they receive information from the central government and they transmit information to the municipalities, and they must implement and follow the guidelines shared by the central government. And the prefects are in charge of ensuring that the guidelines are complied with by the municipalities, where we have mayors that are elected. Municipalities have their own functions and competences. So as you can see, we are a unitary decentralized state. We have a central government that is extended through divisions by prefects that are appointed, and at the municipal level, we have mayors that are elected, and the central government can share instructions, and prefects are in charge of, and the prefects ensure that the guidelines are respected. The prefects are the supervisory authority of municipalities. So the prefects are in charge of ensuring that the municipalities comply with the with the central government strategies and guidelines. So the prefects are there to make sure that the national strategy is abided by. And in order to do that, in order to make sure that everything works well, we have what we call consultation framework. And those consultation frameworks include the prefects that represent the government and that are close to municipalities, formed by mayors and municipal councillors. We also have statutory tour of prefects made by the prefects in his or her jurisdictions. And during that tour, the prefect assess the needs of the population and shares that with the central government. We also have what we call quarterly reporting on budget execution and investment projects. The law provided that every quarter, municipalities shall report about their budget implementation and about investment projects, so that the central government can know the progress that they've made, and so that they can also adjust the strategy. We also have a measure that we call approval and transmission of accounts. The prefect has to approve the municipal budget. The accounts of the municipalities are approved by the prefect. Otherwise, they cannot be implemented. So even if a municipality is autonomous and has an autonomous budget voted by them, the prefect has to approve that budget, and it is The same for the accounts of those municipalities after implementation of budgets. So municipal budgets are in Benin or in Western Africa. In Western Africa, we have many municipalities have their own resources and transfers from the state, from the central government. And those transfers, those allocation of funds are 60% of the budget here in Benin, except if we have municipalities that have bigger resources, municipal resources, but municipalities depend on funds allocated by the central government through a structure that we call development support fund, a municipal development support fund, and they allow municipalities to implement the strategies. And every year, the state has annual audits and controls, and those those reports are accessible, and those reports are around how funds are allocated, how strategies are implemented, and the state, through those reports, can see how much funds they can allocate during the next year. So when it comes to municipalities, here I was talking about the link or the relationships between the central government, the divisions, and the municipalities. But in the municipalities, there is a structure. We have a mayor that is elected, and under the municipality, we have what we call arrondissement or subdivisions, and under that, we have villages or neighborhoods or quarters, and the leaders are all elected. And as I said earlier, municipalities are the only decentralization level, and arrondissement and villages are without autonomy or budget. They depend on municipalities. They depend on the municipality of their jurisdictions in order to implement whatever they have to implement. And for a good monitoring and evaluation, we have a subdivision council made of mayors and subdivision chiefs, and we also have monitoring and reporting tour at least twice a year. So the mayor has to report at least twice a year in a public manner, on top of administrative and management reports that are elaborated separately. So we have what we call bodies in the municipality. We have political bodies, and we have administrative and technical bodies. This is part of the 2021 reform that has been implemented since 2022. In the political bodies, we have the municipal council and the supervisory board. The municipal council is the lead body of the municipality, and under that municipal council, we have a supervisory board. They are both chaired by the mayor. And the supervisory board is made up of the mayor, the deputy mayors, and the permanent presidents of mandatory committees. And as you know, they are all elected. They are politicians that are led by the mayor, who is also a politician, who has to submit a quarterly report to the municipal council for approval. In the administrative and technical body, we have the executive secretariat. They are the essential body of administration, and it is led by the executive secretary. And the executive secretary is in charge of organizing the budget. That is part of the reform, the 2021-2022 reform. Before, it used to be the mayor that was in charge of organizing the budget. But with reforms, we have the political bodies and we have the administrative and technical body on the other side. The executive secretary is in charge of producing monthly reports submitted to the to the supervisory board with performance assessment. If they judge that the mayor is not efficient enough, he can be removed. And the objectives for all the information and data is to ensure that decentralization objectives are on track. As I said earlier, we have grassroots democracy and local development. They have to see if that is working well. The central government can also provide guidelines through sectoral policies. Thanks to those information, to those data, it allows also for decision-making at various levels of responsibilities on several areas of specific, shared, or delegated competence. So municipalities have specific competence, shared competence, and delegated competence. So 3 levels of competence in terms of security, land tenure, civil status, budget, health, education, transport, drinking water. And all the information collected allows for the development of reference documents on the state of local governance. So we have a document that we call Local Governance Index. We also have Decentralization and Deconcentration Policy Implementation Report. We also have the development of Local Finance Outlook. Those 3 documents allow to share information from the local level to the national level. The data also allows to assess the performance of municipalities, and it has an impact on subsidy allocation. We have audit and control. For example, in 2024, we have audit and control right now, and municipal performance is reviewed, and we use the performance in requirements for subsidy allocation. And the information also allows to implement positive or negative sanctions on the administrative level when it comes to removal from office or when it comes to rewarding. We also have political decisions. If the report states a dysfunction at the level of the municipalities, some political actors can use that to call for reforms or dismissals. And that allows me to now talk about relations and power dynamics between central government and municipal political authorities. I told you about the municipal organization, municipal structure, and as I said earlier, Benin is a nation with a unitary decentralization. The municipal council and the supervisory board, and the mayor are elected, and they hold mandate and a political office, and they are not necessarily technicians. And even if they were, we have to separate the politic and the technical, because politics has to oversee. And since the prefect is the supervisory authority of all local governments, he has to ensure the legality of municipal actions. So the prefect has the power to approve documents or to suspend implementation of a project or of an action if he or she deems such action is not regular or is not in compliance with the central government. The prefect can also act in place of the municipality, and there are ways, there are provisions for that. And what are the requirements for intervention? Administrative-wise, there has to be a gross misconduct by the mayor or the deputy mayor. And in that case, the deputy mayor may be suspended or removed from office by the Council of Ministers. So, first of all, the mayor might be suspended, and if the gross misconduct is found, the Council of Ministers can remove the mayor from office. So what is a gross misconduct? A gross misconduct is defined as any act punishable under criminal law and constituting a breach of honor or probity, or any violation of the rules of administrative ethics, representing a serious breach of duty or abuse of power, or which leads to a serious malfunction in the performance of operation of the public service, which is seriously detrimental to the interests of the municipality. And when it comes to budget matters, if the budget is not adopted by the deadline, the supervisory authority, which is the prefect, settles the budget and makes it enforceable within 15 days, or in the event of failure by municipal authorities to comply with the measures prescribed by laws and regulations. The prefect, following an unanswered formal notice, shall assume their functions and take all appropriate measures. So those are a few points that I wanted to share with you in order to show that this wasn't always the type of decentralization that we had. The mayor used to be the organizer and the convener of everything. And we've seen the limits of that. And the central government decided to separate the political bodies and the technical bodies, and to have that monitoring and evaluation reporting structure that allows the municipalities to share information with the central government and to use substitution, and allows the central government to substitute the municipal or local authorities. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gildas, for that very clear and lucid presentation. It was really easy to follow, even for many of us who are not well versed with decentralization in Benin. I think it was very easy to follow. So thank you very much. It was very clear. And what struck me immediately is that despite the different jurisdiction and the different histories of administration, there are so many aspects that sound very familiar to us, or to me at least, in coming from Sub-Saharan Africa, with predominantly English-speaking countries operating on a different system. Particularly the systems that you describe for the collection of information, oversight, performance reporting, budget preparation, etc. With, of course, the big difference, at least I think in comparison to, for example, South Africa, but I think quite a number of countries around us here, the role of the prefect, and the very important role that the prefect plays also in execution and prior approval of budgets and execution. I think that is something that stands out. I'm just looking at the time, and I don't want us to lose out on the presence of our interpreter, who can only be here until 2:20. So there are one or two questions in the chat, Gildas, and maybe you can, while Tanash is presenting, try to answer them in the chat, answer them in writing, or otherwise we will return to them in the general Q&A after Tanash's presentation. So, but please have a look at the questions in the chat. So let's go to Eastern and Southern Africa and listen to Professor Tinashe Chigwata, who is Associate Professor at the Dalla Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape and the head of the Multi-Level Government Project. Colleague of mine, very knowledgeable on local government in Southern and Eastern Africa, who will talk to us on those experiences. So, Tanash, over to you.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the invitation to present on this important topic. So to Jacqueline and the team for putting this together, thank you so much. And also to my co-panelist, Gildas, thank you so much for setting the bar high by, presenting comprehensively on the situation from Benin. In my presentation, I will try to, so mine is much more of a comparative presentation, looking at a number of countries, looking at the institutional design as well as the practice relating to supervision in a number of countries. I will use examples from Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, and Kenya, as well as Nigeria, just to illustrate some of the points. So, with that, let me share my screen. You may give me a moment. Here we go. Yep, could you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, it's visible. All good.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. I think Yap has already introduced me already, so I won't say much other than to say that I'm at the University of the Western Cape and the Dalla Omar Institute. I do research and teaching around local government related courses. And I think as Yap already mentioned, we work together at the Institute. So just an outline of my presentation. I'll just start briefly looking at definitions, the rationale behind supervision, and looking at the critical elements of supervision as well. I'll try to fuse in some practice into those issues, and then I'll conclude with a few remarks about the major issues that are emerging in as far as this topic is concerned. So just starting on the definition side, I think in general, Guild has already given us an idea in terms of what supervision is about. But in a nutshell, it is simply about intervention by one order of government in another order by prescribing outcomes. So an order of government, it could be the central government, it could be the national government, it could be the federal government in the case of Nigeria, or it could be a state government in countries where there are federal systems. And what it also comes out quite clearly is that intervention establishes a hierarchical relationship. So it really puts, the governments in a way that shows that there's a hierarchy beginning with the national or central government at the top, and provinces or states in the middle, and local government. But for the most part of I think in many parts of the continent, in fact, most countries on the continent have got unitary systems with the local government. So that relationship often involves, the central government and local government. It is an important dimension of local autonomy. If you look at, the literature as well as the practice, when we talk about local autonomy, the focus is often on issues such as, finances, such as powers and functions of local government. That's what the focus is. The focus is often on that. But supervision is also, I think, a critical dimension of local autonomy. It imposes certain limitations on what local government can do. So it's the other side of local autonomy, and hence I think it is important to have a discussion on that. But if you look across literature in Africa, when it comes to local government, the dimension is always on the financial, is always on powers and functions, with supervision, and also to some extent intergovernmental cooperation receiving limited attention. What is the rationale and the elements of supervision? So why supervise in the first place? Why is it necessary for the central government to supervise local government? So the first issue is that, there are certain national and local interests or objectives that must be protected and promoted. And supervision is that instrument that gives, higher levels of government or the central government the instrument to be able to see that, those important national and local objectives are realized in practice. For example, access to water, access to public services, and in other issues, macroeconomic stability, and many other issues. So it is that instrument that allows local, central government to be able to oversee what happens at a local level to ensure that those interests, national or local, are actually promoted. It's also an important instrument to invoke when things do not go right at the local government level or at a county level. We know that it's not in all circumstances that counties or local governments will deliver services, will deepen democracy, will promote development. In some other cases, there are big challenges that may actually confront or stand in the way of realization of these objectives. This could be, issues of corruption. This could be in cases where there's political instability in a council of a municipality, and that instability is preventing that municipality from functioning well. It could be an issue that there's a skills deficit in a municipality or in a local government or a district council that is preventing the district from performing well. It could be, I think, many other issues that could arise at a local government level that would, stand in the way of the realization of these national and local objectives. So supervision becomes that instrument that is at the disposal of central government to ensure that when things do not go right, they can be corrected. And the major elements of supervision in general, it's a regulation. So the national government or the central government puts in place a framework composed of laws and policies to guide how local government or district governments exercise their functions. So that's the regulatory framework. In that framework could be constituted by also performance standards, for example, relating to minimum requirements for appointment of key personnel, key managers, quality of water, and many other standards that could be established. And the second one is monitoring. The third one is support, and the last one being intervention. And an element that can also be added is that given the impact of supervision on local government, the fact that it constrains local autonomy, the critical question that comes is, what are there any checks and balances to prevent the abuse of supervision powers? Because supervision grants, a central government enormous powers to actually prescribe outcomes at a local government level, and checks and balances becomes important to ensure that those supervisory powers are put into good use. They are used as intended. They are not abused for political or any other reasons. So this is, I think, in a nutshell, the rationale and the main elements of supervision. Now let's look at supervisory systems on the continent. It is I think it's a mammoth task to actually go through and having a deep understanding of supervisory systems on the continent, because if you look at 54 countries on the continent, all of them, they've got sometimes similar systems. There are also differences, and in many ways the differences also relate to the supervisory systems that are in place. So we can see, I think, these variations in terms of how the supervisory regime is designed and how it is implemented in practice. Some of the decisive factors, as Yap alluded, is I think the colonial legacy. I think much of the governance system that we have at a local level in many countries still was shaped by the colonial system that we had. And if you go in many countries, you still see the remnants of those colonial systems in place. The second critical factor is that we are on the continent, African countries, but we don't have the same systems of government. If you look at the Francophonic countries, the kind of systems that they have, what you find in Anglophonic countries, there's also a difference. And the major issue for me is whether the system of government is delegated or devolved. So where a system of government is delegated, and devolved, there tends to be a difference between how the supervisory systems are put in place. And this also applies to the deconcentrated systems as well. Another critical factor is whether the supervisory regime is anchored in the constitution or not. because if it is anchored in the constitution is the highest law of the country, it means that it is much more significant as compared to situations where it only have legislative recognition. So there are those differences that you see. If you go to Kenya, the supervisory system is anchored in the constitution. If you go to Botswana, it is not in the constitution. Local government is not recognizing the constitutions. So those differences, I think, also becomes critical when we analyze supervisory system on the continent. There is also the issue of the de facto versus the de jure. What you see in terms of the law and what happens in practice, there's often a big difference between the two. And the next critical factor I think that we are all maybe aware of is the fact that the level of tolerance, whether a ruling party tolerate an opposition-led local government at the local level, I think shapes a lot how supervisory systems work out in practice. In cases where you have, I think, an opposition political party, in charge of a strategic city, we tend to see that the relationship between the center and the local tends to be, conflictual. And the implementation of that supervisory system is stretched to ensure that, in other cases, the ruling party tries to regain the control through, the means that are established to supervise local government. Then the last point that I wanted to mention is that there is also this, understanding. It's this practice, or that you see on the continent, this belief that the higher the better. So in other words, the way we structure government in Africa is that at a national level we have got clever guys, intelligent guys that are capacitated, that know what they do, that are maybe least corrupt. As you go down the ladder, you go to local government, less clever guys, less intelligent, more corrupt. And when things go wrong, there's this, understanding that, the guys at the national level or the central level will be able to go down and fix things, which is not often the case. Some other cases, local authorities or, local governments could even have higher capacity than a national department at the national level. There could be even, corruption could even be more pervasive at a national level than at a local level. So when there's a crisis in a municipality as a result of corruption, then it boggles the mind, how can people that are more corrupt at the national level come to solve corruption at a local level? So those are some of the factors that I see often in shaping and in informing the application or the implementation of supervisory regimes on the continent. Now, let's look, just to give you an example in terms of the variations around the systems of government. If you look at Botswana, just look at on your left. This is what is available on Botswana's Ministry of Local Government website. So the Ministry of Local Government in Botswana is the one that oversees the system. Now, just look at that. It says in bold, there are 16 semi-autonomous local authorities. So that already gives you a picture that local government in Botswana is not autonomous. They enjoy some discretion here and there. But I think the last point, which is highlighted, is quite crucial. It says local governments in Botswana is there to implement the development programs and the services at the local level of the ministry. So local government in Botswana was designed to implement the programs of the Ministry of Local Government. So this is something that is very common in these countries, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, where there seems to be an understanding that the Ministry of Local Government at the national level is part of local government. So if you ask in those conversations, you say, give us the key actors that are part of your local government, they actually mention happily the Ministry of Local Government as being part of local government. On the far right, on Kenya, you see that there is Article 189. It gives a reflection of a much more, I think, autonomous system of subnational governments anchored on counties. The reference is made to functional institutional integrity, constitutional status, and institutions of the two levels of government. So clearly, an indicator that Kenya has moved the direction of devolved system of government, which is I think far away from what you would see in Botswana. Now let's look at the the first element, monitoring, I won't discuss, I think, regulation. I think the questions that were given was to focus on these three: monitoring, support, and intervention. So monitoring in general, I think it is there to ensure that local governments comply and perform according to the required standards. So when a national or central government goes to a local government on a monitoring exercise, they are looking at, are you complying with the law? Are you performing against the standards that have been set? So that is in general, I think, the reason behind monitoring. And we're seeing here Article 156 of the Constitution of Zambia, specifically saying that the performance of councillors, must be monitored. And the fact that councillors are collectively and individually accountable to the national government and the residents. This also raises another issue to say the first primary accountability from this provision lies with the center, not with the local. So again, this could be an indicator in terms of the direction in which the country is taking as far as devolution is concerned. In general, a monitoring system is about getting regular information on the function of the system of decentralized government. The reason of getting this, I think, this information is to be able to put in place, a system that, indicates when there are problems that requires an intervention from the center. It involves the collection of information. Gildas has already covered that, and such information could be, annual reports, could be audit reports, could be periodic reports, could be financial reports, and other things. It could also involve the analysis of such information, the distribution of information to relevant stakeholders, including, provinces or states in countries where there are federations, but also to the public. Where issues are identified, for example, capacity limitations, then the monitoring system, identifies the gaps, and the national government or central government can then extend, training and assistance. So that's what monitoring is essentially about. And the question then that comes is, who monitors? Again, there are variations throughout the continent on some of the actors that are involved in monitoring, but in general, in most of the countries, there's a national ministry that is responsible for local government. There are different terms, but you will see that there is ministry that is there that oversees local government. And in many countries, there are also deconcentrated officials of this ministry at a provincial level, at a local level. Gildas has referred to them as prefects. In Zimbabwe, they are called district administrators, and their origins is the colonial era, where they were actually referred to as district commissioners that were put in place by the colonial government to oversee the native population. We still have them today, but in a different name, essentially exercising the same function. In other countries, sectorial or line departments or ministries also undertake some form of monitoring over local government. This could be, ministries responsible for water or for environment and many others. We also have semi-independent bodies that also oversee how, local government, district governments, and county governments are functioning. This could be also human rights bodies. In South Africa, the Human Rights Commission is quite strong when it comes to that. There's a public protector that is quite strong. In Zambia, there's what is called as the Local Government Service Commission. So the commission oversees local government in as far as administration and human resources is concerned. It is the independent institution that is charged with that responsibility. In Zimbabwe, they have what is referred to as the Local Government Board that exercises a similar function to the Local Government Service Commission. There are also parliamentary committees that undertake some form of oversight. Audit institutions, like the Auditor General and others, they also monitor local government in the area of finance. So in general, this is, I think, the monitoring landscape. If you look at the continent, this is what you see, that these are some of the actors that are involved in this aspect. Then the second element, support. So there are two dimensions or nature of support that can be identified on the continent, and these have to do with the question whether the system of government is actually federal or is it a unitary but decentralized system of government. In federations, there is what is referred to as the federal or national to local government support. So where the federal government provides direct support to local government. In South Africa, this happens. Support actually can go straight from the national government to local government, bypassing the province. And this is, I think, the most common form of support. And in other countries, because of the fact that most of the governments that we have on the continent are unitary in nature, support is usually from the national to the local government. The middle layer of government is usually administrative. It's actually deconcentrated officials. So the support usually just goes straight to local government, and the deconcentrated officials can then oversee how resources are used. Then the forms of support, I think there are also, variations. It may include capacity building, the training of officials. It could be about financial support. It could be about model laws and policies. So the national government can come up with a model law and help, particularly poor or and low capacity municipalities to have a basis when they develop their bylaws. And many governments, I think, on the continent, they actually do that, and provision is made for the development of model laws and policies. Then support. Here is, I think, a clear provision, again, from the South African Constitution that imposes an obligation on national and provincial government to support municipalities. You don't find, this provision. It's not a common practice on the continent to find a very specific provision that instructs, higher spheres of governments to say you must provide support to local government. Kenya has got a similar provision as well, Article 189. But what you see in practice is that even though there is a constitutional instruction or legislative instruction to provide support, in practice, support is often inadequate, or it is not provided. So there's a difference between what the law actually say and what actually happens in practice. And I think this is common in many countries, and this would explain why the local government system in many of the African countries is not they're really performing well, because support is usually lacking among other reasons. Then the last, I think, critical element is that of intervention. When you've set up the regulatory framework, when you've monitored, you've provided support, but still the problems are not resolved, what is the instrument that is at the disposal of the central government? And this instrument is intervention. So it is corrective in nature. It is there to correct things that would have gone wrong. But it is the most, I think, intrusive form of supervision that must be utilized as a measure of last resort. So if you want to take local autonomy into account, when things do not go wrong, do not go right, you should consider, I think, using the intervention instrument only as a measure of last resort. Given the need to protect local autonomy, if you look across literature, the number of principles that you see there that countries are encouraged to adopt as part of their legal framework to ensure that they've got a progressive intervention framework. And the first one is the issue to do with the legality, the fact that you need to set up the rules for intervention somewhere in law, whether in a constitution or in a law of parliament, and you must comply with what the law says. If the second one is proportionality. As they say, don't use a hammer to squash an ant. If there's a small problem in a municipality, you cannot use that as a justification to dismiss an entire council. But we've seen this happening on the continent, where the central government just intervenes, even just because there's a small problem, and usually this is informed by other reasons. There's also the issue of rationality. When you intervene, it must be on a rational basis. And lastly, the fact that spheres of governments or local government, central government must work together, and they must not treat each other as enemies. A survey of I think of a number of countries also shows that the most common forms of intervention that you see are directives. So the central government can issue through the Ministry of Local Government or any other a directive to a municipality or to a district council to say, listen, we see that you are not complying or you're not doing as what you are required to do. We are directing you to reverse whatever you have done. We are directing you to undertake certain actions to make sure that you fulfill your obligations. So this is one of the common instruments that is used in the intervention space. The second one is this, I think, a litany of intervention instruments that are very common in a number of countries. They relate to, approvals, for example, approval of the budget, approval of a bylaw, suspensions, withdrawals, or alterations of council resolutions. So where a council sits and decides that they want to take in direction, and they come up with a resolution to that effect. In a number of countries such as Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana, the national government can actually reverse that. They can reverse that. The next form is assumption of responsibility. And then the last one, which is, I think, usually at the heart of local autonomy, is the dissolution of council, which has happened in a number of African countries. Just to give you an example, in Uganda, for example, there's this provision that says the president, with the approval of parliament, may assume the executive and legislative powers of a district. So this is, I think, that instrument that gives the central government enormous powers, which is different from the South African case. In South Africa, even when a province intervenes in a local government, they cannot assume the legislative powers of a council, except when they are setting a temporary budget. And these are the circumstances under which the president in Uganda can intervene in local government. Then the last element that I wanted to discuss is just the checks and balances. So given the fact that supervision is necessary, there's also a need to protect local autonomy by establishing checks and balances. And the way of doing that is by ensuring that, as I said, supervision mechanisms are regulated, they are provided in law, and this provides the courts with an opportunity to step in and correct any non-compliance with the law. What we've seen, I think, in Africa is that they are essentially pro-decentralization courts and those courts that are pro-centralization. For example, the South African court, if you look at a number of judgments on local government, they've been pro-local government, trying to protect local government autonomy. If you look at Zimbabwe, on the other hand, the Zimbabwean Constitutional Court recently issued a judgment in Combined Relatives Association versus the Ministry of Local Government, where the court is actually endorsed the minister's power to direct councils to resign or alter or suspend their resolutions. So you have here a court that is now coming to say it is okay for the national government to resign the council resolutions. Yet the constitution of Zimbabwe of 2013 says that Zimbabwe has got a devolved system of government. So what kind of devolved system of government that allows the national government to intrude in this particular way? Another instrument of preventing the abuse of powers is the role of other bodies that can intervene at the national, federal, other than the federal or national government. In Kenya, they've got the Senate. So the Senate may terminate the suspension of a county. So if the president has suspended the county, the Senate can do that. The other mechanism is that of limiting the duration of the intervention. For example, in Uganda, the intervention can only last 3 months, so it doesn't last forever unless it is approved by parliament. But the critical question is, are the checks and balances effective? What are the political dynamics? In a country where, the president has got influence on how, the parliament operates, can parliament effectively check on the president? I think this is the question that has been raised in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in Uganda, sorry. A question of a culture of constitutionalism, even though the law can say that these are the requirements, these are the prescription, these are the ways in which you can intervene. Is there anyone who complies with the law, or they choose to do something else in practice? So a culture of constitutionalism is also becomes important. In conclusion, from my analysis, I think it's quite clear that supervisory regime varies across the continent. There are different systems that are there. It's also quite clear that emphasis is often on one side of local autonomy, looking at finances, powers, and functions. So not so much focus on intergovernmental supervision, even though it is quite crucial to effective subnational government. We also see that in many of the constitutions, if you look at many local government acts, supervisory powers are not limited or regulated. So in many cases, higher levels of government do as they please, because, for example, intervention is not properly regulated. And the way it is properly regulated, we also see that, sometimes the central government ignores the rules of the game. So what the law says, what the constitution says, they decide to do something else. Then the last point is simply that there's also been cases of abuse of supervisory powers merely for political ends. And this has been common in a number of countries. In cases where those supervisory powers are not effective, we've seen in a number of countries, Ethiopia, for example, and in Uganda, where the bigger cities are often then made central administrations, in other words, run by the central government. So in a nutshell, I think those are my views on the topic, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanash. That was really excellent. Wonderful overview of supervision frameworks and also practices and analysis across the continent. And again, what strikes me is that the differences really, if you dig a bit deeper, the differences between the Anglophone and Francophone designs are not that great. There are many similarities, like as you indicated, Tanash, the role of the prefect is actually very similar to the role of the district administrator, which is still quite common across Sub-Saharan Africa. In both systems, there are intervention powers, and in both systems, there are checks and balances to those intervention powers. But of course, there are very meaningful differences too. And one of the things that, for example, comes to mind on my side is, what Gildas explained about the different types of powers that are exercised by local authorities, the delegated powers and the shared powers. And I would imagine that the differences between those also have an impact on the way they are supervised. Maybe that's something that Gildas could also comment on, whether the differences in powers that municipalities have or that local governments have, where those powers originate from, does it influence the way the central government supervises them? But anyway, there's already a excellent engagement and exchange of views happening on the chat. So I'm just doing a quick inventory of the questions that were posed in the chat. John asked a question about how to ensure that the council approves the budget, after the administration has prepared it. And Gildas has answered that question in the chat, so I refer you to that. Glenn asked a question about the constraints on the powers of the prefects, which Gildas also explained in the chat. So maybe Gildas, if you could still comment on, I think, 3 issues. The one is the role of citizen supervision. Are there accountability frameworks towards the citizens and the public, whether you could comment on that? And the role of the audit institutions. Do you have, for example, in Benin, I would imagine there is a audit chamber or an audit office. I would imagine they audit the accounts of local governments. Maybe you could comment on that briefly. And then the question by Emmanuel on the designs and practices of supervision systems. Maybe that could be an invitation for you to just maybe comment a bit on the political dynamics of supervision. You've explained the system and the framework, but what is the subtext? Is there lots of acrimony? Is there tension between the central government and, for example, the mayors? Do mayors stand up against a prefect saying, I'm elected and you are not? Or is that not really a dynamic that plays itself out? Just keen to hear about the practice of supervision and how politics and, I suppose, the sensitivity of decentralization also influences that. So I'd like to hand back to you, Gildas, and then in the meantime, we'll collect 1 or 2 questions for Tanash and hand over to him as well. So Gildas, over to you for maybe just a reflection on some of those questions, if you don't mind.
D'accord. Merci. Merci pour ces différentes présentations et les différentes questions.
Thank you, Yap. Thank you for presenting the questions again, I try to answer in the chat. So first of all, regarding the budget process, it is not easy to influence. It's true that budgets are autonomously elaborated, but there is some tension between elected and appointed officials when it comes to approval and rejects and rejections. Sorry, the municipal council might reject the technical elaborated budget, but with the new reform, it was decided that before starting the budget elaboration, we have a budget debate. So there's a framework for elected officials to gather and discuss about the budget orientations and to produce at the end of it a report or some minutes. And the technicians, based on that report, are tasked with elaborating or creating the budget. And once the budget has been created, it is sent to the supervisory board, which is a political body that has less officials. We have the mayor and deputy mayors. We have leaders of different commissions or committees, and they are in charge of ensuring that the budget is in line with what was discussed. And now the municipal council adopts or approves the budget. And once that budget is approved or adopted by the supervisory board, it is sent to the municipal council, which is supposed to approve it as per the new reform, except in cases where revenues are expected to be increased. There must be a justification for that. And since that has been implemented, we realized that things are better now, but there are still some tensions and conflicts. And when it comes to accountability, we have the law prescribes a lot of provisions. We have a public reporting by the mayor, a public accountability report. And before that public hearing or audit, the mayor and the technicians decide on what they have to report, and they create documents that they are going to use for that hearing or audit. And on that day, the mayor has to account for the resources that he used and on what he or she used them. That's the first thing. The other accountability point is administrative and accountability. So it is provided that budget documents, planning documents, and account documents be stored in a public accessible room. So any citizen should be able to access it. And if the citizen wants to keep a copy, the citizen has to pay for it. We also have annual audit and control, annual audit and monitoring, in many countries in West Africa. In many countries in West Africa, they depend mostly on subsidies. And we have reports on those subsidies on the Decentralization Ministry website, and also on the Finance Ministry website.
qu'il y ait d'autres missions d'investigation, qu'il y ait d'autres missions de vérification qui sont diligentées.
However, there can still be other.
Vérifier peut-être des malversations spécifiques qui sont.
However, the government can still decide to set up missions in order to do some private audits, some audits that are outside of the scope of the annual control and audits. Now, when it comes to the prefect's authority, I would like to say that the law provides that the prefect before recently could suspend the municipality and replace it. But with the new reform, the prefect can refer to an administrative jurisdiction to rule. The mayor also, if he or she finds that the prefect is abusing his or her power, can refer to the administrative judge, because the prefect can also be misguided. The mayor can be right. We've seen cases like that, and that is why the latest reform has addressed that. In Benin, currently, we have what we call the supervision cell, the supervision and management monitoring cell, which is part of the office of the president, and their role is to monitor what is being done at the local level with mayors and the prefect, with the mayors and the prefects. And in some cases, the reports from that cell could be sent to courts, and that is in rare cases. So, because whether we want it or not, municipalities are led by politicians, and in that cases, we try to find mediation solutions. But tensions are stronger in municipalities where the mayors and the prefects are not from the same political parties, and that can lead to legal suits and things like that. So this is what I had to share with you regarding those questions.
Thank you.
I'm still available if there are further questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gildas. Thanks for answering those questions. And I think at this point, we have to excuse our interpreter who has another engagement. So from now on, we'll probably have to make do without the interpretation in, sort of the final wrap up of this session. I'm just checking my list of questions, whether there's any questions for Tanash that are coming through. I haven't seen anything on the chat, but if there's anyone who wants to come in with a last comment or question addressed at Prof. Chiguata in terms of his overview of the supervision system across Africa, and now is your time. And then after that, we're going to have to close the session as we are nearing the end of our time, and for now we have to make do without the translation. So any questions for Tanash? I see Paddy Sianga Knudsen. Welcome to you. Good to have you in the room. A very active and loyal member of LPSA. Wonderful to have you, and please, over to you for your question.
Thank you. Actually, not a question, but more of some reflections that I think would be interesting to hear Tinashe. I wanted him to have the last word. I know Jackie said, we're always having a bit of a back chat in the background with LPSA. And Yap and Judy, thank you so much together with Ka in terms of leading us in this group. Looking forward to more engagements. A couple of things that I thought were really interesting, as both Gildas, pardon, je suis anglophone, mais je peux me dérouler juste un petit peu en français, mais ça marche pas, je pense. Ça l'interprétation. Votre anglais, c'est beaucoup plus mieux que mon français. Alors, si vous me permettez, je veux le faire en anglais. So maybe just thinking a little bit about supervision, and I think I like the questions that, that popped up when we were talking about the citizen. And I think this is what we continue to see, even when we've had gatherings where we've got, African experts coming together, as we did over talking about decentralization in Nairobi, the focus was really, what about the community? How are they involved in the monitoring? So I think it was really interesting, Gildas, to just hear these kind of tools that are there. And I think a big part of that is civil society, right? And we see that there's a lot that civil society networks and bodies that have grown around looking at what decentralization should mean and say to the community. So I thought that would be very interesting for us to just put down in terms of our take home. But then I was also thinking about the associations, and some of the very important work that LPSA has done is to work with local government associations and local government authority associations that could be at a national level, very active. I think we have East African Community Local Government Association, where you continue to see them be a source not only of kind of intel, but also advocating. I think I like what you said, Tinashe, advocating for a change of image, that not everything bad that's happening at the local government is related to the lack of capacity, and that maybe we need to look at several things. But I think other things that they manage to advocate for is what kind of capacity should we be looking at the local government? And indeed, what is that role of central government in terms of monitoring? Zooming in on that, and my last comment is around regional integration influence. I lived in the Balkans for a couple of years, and I'm always stunned to just see the level of civil society, local government partnerships that were there, but also to think about an important influence that a player like the European Union has. Now, I was born and raised on the continent and worked on decentralization first on the continent. And so the EU, you sort of see it as a player, as a donor. And here it was a bit different because it sets the standard. And so it was very interesting then for me to look at within Africa, how do we look at regional bodies as setting some of these standards? Of course, in the EU, a bit different because these are two boxes, and regional integration has some tick boxes as well, and they have a bit of a carrot and stick approach to it, right? But what role should we see, for instance, from a regional body? And so maybe also, Yap, you may have some comments around, I don't know, SADC and COMESA, Gildas. I'm thinking ECAS. I'm not sure to what extent ECOWAS is integrating or working around some of these measures, but what role do we see indeed of regional organizations in helping to promote and to be that extra eye, checking up on what's really happening together with parliamentary committees and so on and so forth. But to what extent are they quite an important body? And I'll stop here, Yap, to thank you for the time, and thank you for putting this together. Thanks again to Jacqueline and the
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Betty. Let's give the final word to Tinashe, and then I'll close out the session.
All right. Thank you so much, Betty. It's great to see you once again, and also for your remarks. Let me just touch upon, and I think on one issue around the role of the citizens. So, of course, the topic was intergovernmental supervision. So, looking at what governments can do amongst themselves. But I think the other side of the coin, which for me is the most important one, is the citizens, because local government is there to serve communities. And when local governments deliver services, they are delivering services to communities. So who is better placed to supervise local government than the citizens themselves? And here in South Africa, we have been doing a number of projects just to determine what kind of environment is conducive for citizens to supervise their local governments. And one of the issues that I think we're able to around finances and procurement was the fact that for citizens to be able to effectively hold local governments accountable, they need information. And we did a study in South Africa looking at municipalities and asking the question whether they actually, make, critical information available that allows citizens to hold municipalities accountable. And the picture was not looking good, because procurement information on how funds are resourced, on how services are delivered in communities, the information is not there. So it becomes, I think, a challenge for citizens to actively involved in local government, in particular to supervise local government without information. And I think this is something that is worth looking at the continent, give it a content perspective to see what is the situation in other countries. Are municipalities, are counties making the critical information available to the citizens so that they can hold their respective municipalities accountable? So I think that would be my remarks around that point. And with that, let me just thank everyone also once again for putting this together and for keeping the momentum going around, organizing regular engagements on important topics on local government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dinesh. So this is probably all we have time for. Just a quick closing word from me. First of all, just to pick up on Paddy's point, I don't want to leave that unattended. I think the issue of the role of regional organizations is so important, and we need to do more work on that. Of course, there are differences between the various regional organizations and their appetite and willingness and capacity to get involved in issues pertaining to decentralization. It's always fairly sensitive and fairly, countries are protective over their own decentralization policies and regimes. And I think it's for us to sort of break that open and say, well, there are things that we can address at a regional level, because there are so many points of comparison and improvement that we can raise. And it really, you don't have to look that hard to be able to make useful comparisons with which we can elevate, I think, the state of local governance and service delivery. So I completely agree with you that we need to use that as points of leverage for the work of LPSA. I think this meeting was really good, and it shows us that comparisons between Francophone and Anglophone Africa are really possible, and they're not that hard to organize. We have the benefit of technology, the benefit of online translation. So I think this went really well, and I hope that everyone, despite the language that is their home language or the language that they prefer to speak, was able to participate in this meeting. And I think, it makes us want to do more of this, to really broaden the network of the Local Public Sector Alliance and make useful connections across the continent. Let me also use this opportunity to highlight the upcoming meeting in March 2025. This was the last meeting of 2024, but in March we have our first meeting of 2025. So please diarize that, keep an eye out for the alerts that will come your way, and we'll try to stick to the original date this time. This time, for this particular meeting, we had to shift the date to accommodate speakers and the lineup, but we try to be as predictable as possible so that we can all plan around these meetings and make them part of our schedule. And we try to keep them short, not much longer than an hour and a half, so that we don't impose too much on your time. Also, an invitation to you to join LPSA if you haven't done so yet. It's free to join. There are no thresholds or impediments. If you sign up, you'll be part of this community, and use it to network, to find friends, find colleagues, find consultants, find work, because really it's a very useful and productive network, this LPSA. I want to thank our panelists, Gildas and Tanash. You did an amazing job in bringing this topic to life and sharing your experiences and your knowledge with us. So thank you so much for making time available and preparing for this. I know it's an extremely busy time of the year. So our thanks go out to you, and let's stay in touch. Then let me also take this opportunity to just thank the people that are in this room, because we have a wonderful group here together. And I also want to mention we have 3 African School on Decentralization graduates in our midst. Some of you may know we recently completed the African School on Decentralization, and 3 of the successful participants are here in the room with us. Lizeka Mabope, Jacqueline Mutura, and Felicitas Makaza were successful in completing this certificate course on decentralization and human rights, which was co-sponsored and co-organized by LPSA. So It's amazing to see that the network is alive and well, and that the ASD alumnus network is working. And yeah, a lot of people in the room that played a role in the ASD, including Paddy, who taught in the ASD last year, and Tanash, who taught in the ASD. So yeah, fantastic to see that that network growing and being active. Thanks also to everyone else who participated: Mercy, John, Maimuna, Emmanuel, Glenn, and I think one or two people that dropped off in the last few minutes. But thanks for joining. Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Jacqueline, for all the work that you put into this. I see you have your hand up. So over to you for the final say.
I see a request from Paddy for a group photo. I will take the group photo. Yeah. So maybe we can switch on our videos so that we can all be part of the photo. I will do the photos. Yeah. Thank you very much. Just 1 minute. Is everybody on there?
Almost.
Yes. One more, Maimuna, if you're able to do it. Jacob. Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Let's see your smiles. Thank you. Very nice. One more time. Let's do that one more time. Some people were offline. Thank you very much. Looking great. Thank you. Back to you, Yap.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Have a wonderful day further, and happy holidays. And let's stay in touch. All the best. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Welcome, Emmanuel. Hope to see you soon again.
Certainly. Thank you very much.